Picture sitting at a suffocatingly pristine dining table, heavily pregnant, surrounded by your fiancé's wealthy, judgmental family who despise you for your size, your skin color, and your background. Now imagine the front doors being kicked open by the city's most ruthless, untouchable crime boss. The room freezes in absolute terror. He walks past. The trembling billionaire stops right behind your chair, rests his violent hands on your swollen belly, and whispers a question that shatters everyone's reality. Whose baby is this? The dining room of the Kings Point estate on Long Island was a masterclass in quiet, suffocating wealth. A massive, custom-built mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, illuminated by the harsh, crystalline glare of a vintage baccarat chandelier. Around this table sat the Cho family, a dynasty built on international logistics and old-world pride. And at the far end, feeling like a glaring stain on a pristine white canvas, sat Maya Jenkins. Maya was 26, beautifully dark-skinned, unapologetically plus-sized, and exactly 7 months pregnant. She wore a tailored emerald green maternity dress that hugged her curves and her swollen belly, a garment that had cost more than her first car purchased solely to appease her fiancé's family. It hadn't worked. Nothing ever worked. "Are you absolutely certain you want another serving of the short ribs, Maya, or—" Helen Cho's voice sliced through the clinking of fine silver. Helen David's mother was a woman carved from ice and societal expectations. She didn't yell, she didn't have to. Her weapons were polite microaggressions delivered with a devastating, tight-lipped smile. Dr. Evans mentioned that carrying excess weight can be terribly strenuous on the baby's heart, and given your natural build, we must be extra cautious. Maya felt the heat rise to her cheeks, a familiar, burning humiliation. She gently placed her silver fork back onto the bone china plate. "I'm fine, Helen. My blood pressure is perfect, and the baby is perfectly healthy." "Of course, dear," Helen replied, taking a microscopic sip of her sparkling water. "We just want what is best for David's child. We have a certain standard in this family, a lineage to protect." Richard Cho, the patriarch, didn't even look up from his tablet, completely ignoring the tension. He was a man who only cared about numbers, shipping manifests, and profit margins. Maya looked to her left, praying for a lifeline. David Cho, her fiancé, sat beside her. He was strikingly handsome, groomed to perfection in his Tom Ford suit, a man who looked like he owned the world. But under the table, his knee was bouncing with a frantic, anxious rhythm. He offered a weak, placating smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom, leave her alone," David muttered, reaching for his crystal tumbler of Macallan 25. It was his 4th glass of the evening. "Maya is glowing. She's fine. I am merely offering maternal advice, David," Helen countered smoothly. "It is a mother's prerogative, especially considering the highly unusual circumstances of your courtship." Maya closed her eyes, taking a deep, slow breath to calm the sudden flutter of anxiety in her chest. The baby kicked a hard, rhythmic thump against her ribs, as if sensing the hostility in the room. The unusual circumstances. That was the polite society term Helen used to describe the fact that David had brought Maya home from Chicago 6 months ago, already a few weeks pregnant, with 0 explanation, no pedigree, and no money to her name. To the Cho family, Maya was a gold digger who had trapped their golden boy. A catastrophic PR nightmare they were desperately trying to bury with a private wedding and airtight non-disclosure agreements. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that Maya wasn't a gold digger. She was a refugee. David wasn't her knight in shining armor. He was a convenient shield. Maya had met David at a high-stakes charity gala in Chicago, back when she was working as an event coordinator. David had been desperate to present a rebellious, progressive image to infuriate his conservative father and force a buyout of his trust fund. Maya had been desperate to disappear. They had struck a quiet, unspoken bargain. He gave her a fortified mansion in Long Island with round-the-clock security. She gave him the ultimate middle finger to his parents' pristine societal image. But as Maya sat there, enduring the suffocating prejudice of the Cho family dinner, she wondered if the trade-off had been worth it. The golden cage was still a cage. So, Maya. Richard suddenly spoke his voice, a low, gravelly baritone that demanded instant attention. He finally set his tablet face down. David tells me you have severed all ties with your family in Illinois. No parents to invite to the wedding, no siblings. It is highly unorthodox. How are we to verify your background? My parents passed away when I was young. Richard, Maya said, keeping her voice incredibly steady, a skill she had learned in a completely different, far more dangerous life. And as for the rest of my relatives, we are estranged. David is my family now. Convenient, Helen murmured into her wine glass. David flinched, pouring himself another massive measure of scotch. Mum, please, just drop it. We're getting married next month. The baby will be a Cho. That's all that matters. Is it? Richard asked, his eyes narrowing at his son. You have been remarkably erratic lately, David. Your accounts are bleeding capital. You are liquidating assets without consulting the board. And there are rumors. David's hand trembled, a few drops of amber liquid spilling onto the pristine white tablecloth. Rumors, rumors. Richard continued, his gaze piercing, that you have involved yourself with individuals far outside of our corporate sphere. Unsavory individuals. Tell me, David, are you in some sort of trouble? Because if you have jeopardized this family's standing to play gangster— Before Richard could finish his sentence, the heavy mahogany doors of the dining room didn't just open. They practically exploded off their brass hinges. The sound was like a thunderclap inside the echo chamber of the dining hall. The heavy doors slammed against the expensive silk-lined wallpaper with a sickening crunch. Helen shrieked, dropping her crystal glass, watching it shatter into 100 glittering pieces on the hardwood floor. Maya's heart stopped. A cold, paralyzing dread flooded her veins, freezing the blood in her chest. She knew that sound. She knew the heavy synchronized thud of tactical boots hitting the floorboards. 5 men filed into the room. They weren't wearing the cheap, flashy suits of street thugs. They wore bespoke, dark Italian wool. They moved with a terrifying, predatory grace, fanning out across the room, securing the exits, pulling the heavy velvet curtains shut with sharp professional efficiency. Maya recognized the man leading the vanguard, Adrian, a man whose smile was as sharp as a razor and twice as deadly. Richard Cho stood up, his face purple with absolute outrage. What is the meaning of this? We have armed security on the perimeter. Who the hell are you to barge into my home? Your security, Adrian said in a soft, polite British accent, is currently taking a very deep, very unconsensual nap in your azalea bushes, Mr. Cho. I suggest you sit down. I will do no such thing. I am calling the police. Richard reached into his tailored pocket for his phone. Before his fingers even grazed the device, a shadow filled the doorway. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The sheer gravitational pull of the man stepping over the threshold silenced Richard instantly. Gabriel Costa. He was a man who commanded the kind of power that didn't need to shout. Standing 6'3" with shoulders broad enough to block out the light from the hallway, Gabriel was breathtakingly terrifying. He wore a charcoal grey 3-piece suit that fit his muscular frame immaculately, a stark contrast to the violent, lethal energy radiating from his dark eyes. His jawline looked like it had been carved from granite, dusted with a dark, masculine shadow of stubble. He moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, like an apex predator, perfectly comfortable in a cage full of panicked sheep. Gabriel Costa was the undisputed head of the Costa Syndicate. He controlled the ports, the politicians, and the shadows of the entire eastern seaboard. He was a myth, a monster, that high society billionaires like the Chos only whispered about behind heavily locked doors. Maya pressed her back hard against her chair, her hands instinctively flying to cover her pregnant belly. She couldn't breathe. Her vision tunneled. He found me. Oh God, he actually found me. Gabriel ignored Richard completely. His dark, fathomless eyes swept over the dining table, taking in the remnants of the lavish meal, the terrified faces of the Cho patriarch and matriarch, and finally settling on David. David looked like a man standing before a firing squad. All the color had drained from his handsome face, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent grey. The tumbler of scotch slipped from his trembling fingers, spilling across the table, soaking into Helen's expensive napkin. Mr. Costa. David stammered, his voice cracking like a terrified child's. He tried to stand, but his knees gave out, sending him collapsing back into his velvet chair. Gabriel, please! I can explain. Gabriel unbuttoned the jacket of his suit, moving with agonizing slowness. He stepped fully into the room, his expensive leather shoes echoing off the floorboards. Can you, David? Gabriel's voice was a low, resonant rumble. It was perfectly calm, which made it infinitely more terrifying. I know the payment is late. David babbled, tears welling in his eyes, completely destroying the facade of the untouchable corporate air. The offshore accounts were frozen by my father's auditors. I just need 48 hours, I swear on my life. Gabriel, I have your money. Helen gasped, grabbing her husband's arm. Money, David? What is he talking about? Who is this man? Quiet, Helen, Richard hissed, finally recognizing the man standing in his dining room. Richard wasn't stupid. He read the intelligence briefs. He knew what a visit from Gabriel Costa meant. It meant blood. Your son, Gabriel said, finally looking at Richard, has a rather expensive appetite for high-stakes underground poker and heavily leveraged sports betting. He came to my people for a loan to cover his losses before you noticed the missing capital. $3 million. Richard turned on his son, absolute fury replacing his fear for a brief second. 3 million. You borrowed money from the mob. I can pay it back, David screamed, practically sobbing now. Mr. Costa, please, I'll sign over my shares of Cho Logistics right now. Just don't hurt me. Gabriel let out a soft, dark chuckle that sent shivers down Maya's spine. It was a sound she knew intimately. It was the sound he made right before he ruined someone's life. $3 million is pocket change. David, Gabriel murmured, stepping closer to the table, dismissing the terrified billionaire air as if he were a mild annoyance. I didn't breach a gated community in Kings Point and put a dozen of your armed guards in the dirt for $3 million. I couldn't care less about your gambling debts. Then what? David whispered, his chest heaving. What do you want? Gabriel didn't answer David. Instead, his gaze shifted. Slowly, deliberately, his dark eyes locked onto the woman sitting at the end of the table, Maya. The silence in the dining room became absolute, thick and suffocating. Maya felt like a rabbit caught in the gaze of a wolf. She couldn't look away. For 6 months, she had run. She had changed her name, changed her city, embedded herself in the most fortified, snobbish family she could find, all to hide from this exact moment. Gabriel's expression changed. The cold, indifferent mask of the Mafia Boss cracked. For a fraction of a second, Maya saw something raw, furious, and agonizingly vulnerable flash in his dark eyes. He walked toward her. Every step Gabriel took felt like a hammer striking an anvil in Maya's chest. The Cho family watched in stunned, breathless silence as the most dangerous man in the state bypassed the weeping heir and the trembling patriarch entirely focused on the pregnant black woman they had spent the entire evening insulting. Gabriel stopped right beside her chair. He was so close Maya could smell the scent of him, cedarwood, expensive tobacco, and a sharp metallic hint of gun oil. It was a scent that brought back a tidal wave of forbidden, terrifying memories. Nights in Chicago? Penthouses whispered promises in the dark, the heavy weight of his gold ring against her skin. Maya kept her eyes glued to her plate. If she looked at him, she would break. "Look at me," Gabriel commanded. The softness was gone from his voice. It was an absolute, unbreakable order. Maya squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear escaping and sliding down her cheek. She slowly lifted her head, her dark eyes meeting his. The intensity in his gaze was enough to burn the whole house down. "Maya," Gabriel breathed his voice, dropping an octave, slipping into a rough, intimate tone that made Helen Cho gasp in shock. "Did you really think you could run from me?" "I had to," Maya whispered, her voice shaking barely audible over the ringing in her own ears. "You gave me no choice, Gabriel." David stared at the two of them, his mouth hanging open in utter bewilderment. "Maya, you know him. How do you know Gabriel Costa?" Gabriel didn't even look at David. He kept his eyes locked on Maya's face, tracing the lines of her jaw. The fullness of her lips, a dangerous possessiveness radiating from his posture. "She knows me," Gabriel said softly. "She knows me better than anyone in the world. Isn't that right, Mia Luz? The Italian pet name." My light echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. Helen choked on her own breath. Richard's eyes went wide. "Don't," Maya pleaded, her hands tightening their grip on her swollen stomach. "Gabriel, please. Not here." "Yes, here." Gabriel snapped the sudden anger in his voice, making Adrian and his men instantly place their hands on their holstered weapons. Gabriel leaned down, placing his large, heavily scarred hands firmly on the armrests of Maya's velvet chair, trapping her. He leaned in his face, inches from hers. "You vanished into thin air. 6 months. I tore Chicago apart looking for you. I burned down 3 rival syndicates thinking they took you. I bled the city dry. And all this time, you were playing house with this pathetic, spineless corporate brat. He offered me safety." Maya shot back, the adrenaline finally overriding her fear, sparking the fierce, unbreakable spirit that had drawn Gabriel to her in the first place. "Safety from you. Safety from the wars, the guns, the blood on your hands. Every time you came home, I couldn't bring a child into that. Gabriel, I wouldn't." Gabriel's eyes dropped from her face to the massive, undeniable swell of her pregnancy beneath the emerald silk. The air left the room. Gabriel slowly lifted his right hand. Maya flinched, but his touch was excruciatingly gentle. His large, warm palm bypassed her defenses and rested directly against her tight, swollen stomach. As if on cue, the baby kicked hard right against Gabriel's palm. Gabriel's breath hitched. A look of profound, earth-shattering realization washed over the ruthless crime boss. His eyes flickered back up to Maya's, demanding the truth. "Tell me," Gabriel demanded, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded dangerously close to desperation. "Gabriel, stop," Maya sobbed, trying to push his hand away, but he was immovable. David, finally finding a scrap of false courage, tried to stand up again. "Hey, take your hands off my fiancée. That's my baby." Gabriel didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. Without looking away from Maya, without removing his hand from her belly, Gabriel simply snapped his fingers. In a blur of motion, Adrian crossed the room, grabbed David by the collar of his Tom Ford suit, and slammed him face first into the mahogany table. The expensive wood groaned under the impact. Adrian casually drew a heavy silenced pistol and pressed the barrel directly against the back of David's skull. Helen screamed a piercing, hysterical sound. "David, oh my God, please don't kill him!" Richard froze, his hands raised in surrender. "Costa, please name your price. Just let my son go." Gabriel acted as if the screaming billionaires didn't exist. The chaos around them was nothing but white noise. He leaned in closer to Maya, his hand still firmly pressing against the life growing inside her. David Cho is a coward who cries when he owes money, Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a lethal vibrating whisper, meant only for her. He couldn't protect a houseplant, let alone you. And he certainly isn't man enough to be the father of this child. Gabriel straightened his posture, turning his head just slightly, so his voice carried across the silent, terrified room. He looked at Helen and Richard, who were staring at Maya as if she were a ghost, realizing the quiet, judged woman they had tormented all evening was intimately tied to a god of the underworld. Then Gabriel looked back at Maya. His eyes were dark, absolute, and burning with a terrifying promise. "I'm going to ask you one time, Maya," Gabriel said, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the dining room. He pressed his hand harder against her belly. "Whose baby is this?" The silence that followed Gabriel Costa's question was heavy enough to crush bone. The grandfather clock in the corner of the dining room ticked each metallic click, sounding like a hammer drop in the suffocating quiet. Maya looked up into Gabriel's eyes. They were obsidian, burning with a frantic, desperate hunger that stripped away all the tailored, terrifying composure of the boss of the Costa Syndicate. In that singular moment, he was not the man who controlled the eastern seaboard. He was a man staring at the physical manifestation of his own legacy, hidden away in a porcelain cage. "Maya," Gabriel whispered, the tremor in his deep voice betraying the violent storm raging inside him. "Answer me." At the end of the table, pinned against the mahogany by the lethal pressure of Adrian's gun, David Cho let out a pathetic, garbled whimper. "Tell him, Maya. Tell him he's crazy. We used a sperm donor. Tell him—" Maya closed her eyes. The absurdity of David's lie was the final pathetic nail in the coffin of their arrangement. She felt the warmth of Gabriel's large hand still resting firmly against her stomach. The baby, as if recognizing the deep, resonant cadence of Gabriel's voice from those quiet nights in Chicago, shifted beneath his palm. She opened her eyes and met Gabriel's unyielding stare. There was no point in running anymore. The wolf had kicked down the door of the sheep's pen. "He's yours," Maya said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the King's Point mansion, it echoed like a gavel striking wood. Gabriel's breath caught in his throat. The ruthless, untouchable kingpin closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, his head dropping slightly as a profound, earth-shattering tremor went through his massive frame. When he opened his eyes again, the desperation was gone. What replaced it was a terrifying, absolute possessiveness that made the air in the room turn to ice. "My child," Gabriel murmured, his thumb gently stroking the curve of her belly through the emerald silk. "You carried my blood, my air into the home of these parasites. You brought a mobster's whore into our home." Helen Cho shrieked, the shock finally shattering her tightly wound, aristocratic composure. She stumbled back from her chair, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at Maya. "You vile, disgusting creature. You let us feed you, clothe you, and you were harboring a criminal's bastard all along." Gabriel didn't yell. He didn't even turn his head immediately. He slowly, deliberately removed his hand from Maya's stomach and stood up to his full 6'3" height. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal suit. "Adrian," Gabriel said softly. "Boss," Adrian replied, his British accent, calm, the suppressed pistol still pressed deep into David's skull. "Shoot the chandelier." Thwip, thwip, thwip. 3 suppressed shots, no louder than the crack of a whip, tore through the air. The massive, vintage Baccarat crystal chandelier, suspended above the dining table, exploded. Thousands of razor-sharp shards of glass rained down like a crystalline monsoon, crashing into the fine china, the roasted short ribs, and the crystal wine glasses. Helen screamed hysterically, throwing her arms over her head as glass showered the room. Richard dove to the floor, covering his face. Gabriel stood perfectly still amidst the destruction, not a single flinch betraying him, as a piece of glass sliced a thin, bloody line across his cheekbone. He finally turned his dark, lethal gaze toward the Cho matriarch. "The next time you refer to my woman as a whore, or my bloodline as a bastard." Gabriel's voice was a low, mechanical purr of pure violence. "I will have Adrian sew your mouth shut with piano wire. Do we have a clear understanding, Mrs. Cho?" Helen, sobbing uncontrollably and covered in fine glass dust, nodded frantically, her face buried in her husband's shoulder. Maya sat frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was why she had run. This casual, devastating capacity for violence. "Gabriel, stop," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "There's no need for this. I gave you the answer you wanted. You gave me the truth, Mia Luce," Gabriel corrected, stepping back to her side, completely indifferent to the chaos he had just unleashed. "But you also gave me 6 months of agony. You let me believe you were dead. You let me burn through my own soul searching for you. And I find you here, playing the dutiful, submissive fiancé to a man who wouldn't know how to protect you if his life depended on it. He kept me hidden from you." Maya fired back her own anger, finally rising to meet his. "You think I wanted to be here, sitting at this table being treated like an exotic zoo animal? I did it to keep my baby safe from the crossfire of your life. From the hitmen, the feds, the constant blood I watched Judge Harrison, Caldwell get blown to pieces on the evening news. Gabriel, a judge you bought. You think I wanted my child growing up waiting for a car bomb?" Gabriel's jaw tightened. The mention of the Caldwell assassination, a brutal cartel retaliation that he had personally avenged in a bloodbath, struck a nerve. He leaned down, gripping the arms of her chair again, caging her in. "There is no crossfire that reaches you, Maya. Never." Gabriel said, his voice fierce and unwavering. "My world is dark, yes, but I am the king of it, and you are mine. Nobody touches what belongs to Gabriel Costa. Nobody, except when they do," Maya whispered, tears spilling over her dark lashes. "Maya." David suddenly gasped from the table, his face pressed against the splintered wood and shattered glass. "Maya, please, tell him to let me go. I kept your secret. I gave you a place to hide. Tell him." Gabriel slowly turned his head toward the heir of Cho Logistics. A dark, twisted smile crept onto the mob boss's face, a smile that promised absolute ruin. "You think she is the only one keeping secrets, David?" Gabriel asked smoothly. Gabriel reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit and pulled out a folded, thick parchment envelope. He tossed it casually onto the ruined table right next to David's head. The envelope bore the wax seal of the Lexington Avenue Consortium, a private intelligence firm known to cater exclusively to the global elite and the underworld. "Did you really think," Gabriel said, pacing slowly around the table toward Richard Cho, who was still cowering on the floor, "that my accountants wouldn't notice when $3 million was requested by a trust fund brat? Did you think I don't run background checks on the vermin who come begging to my syndicates?" "What is that?" Richard demanded, slowly rising to his knees, ignoring the glass crunching beneath his trousers. He stared at the envelope. "That," Gabriel said, his voice echoing in the ruined dining room, "is your son's actual business portfolio. It seems David wasn't just losing money at the poker tables. He was bleeding Cho Logistics dry to pay off blackmailers." David let out a choked, desperate sob. "Don't. Please, Gabriel. I'll do anything." "You see, Maya," Gabriel continued, stopping behind David and looking down at the trembling man with profound disgust. "David didn't bring you here out of the goodness of his progressive, rebellious heart. He didn't bring you here to anger his parents. He brought you here because he hired a very dirty, very dead private investigator named Sullivan Reed to find out exactly who you were." Maya's blood ran cold. She stared at David, the man who had offered her a lifeline in Chicago. "David, what is he talking about?" "Tell her, David," Gabriel commanded, placing a heavy hand on the back of David's neck, pressing his face harder into the table. "Tell her what you discovered 4 weeks ago." David wept, the sound pathetic and hollow. "I'm sorry. Maya, I'm so sorry. I was drowning. The margins were failing. My father was going to disinherit me. He found out," Gabriel interjected, cutting off the blubbering excuses, "that his fake fiancée was the missing obsession of Gabriel Costa. And instead of keeping you safe, Maya, instead of honoring this little arrangement you two had," David made a phone call. Gabriel looked at Richard, who was staring at his son in mounting horror. "Your son contacted Senator Wyatt Montgomery," Gabriel stated, dropping the name of one of the most corrupt, heavily guarded politicians in the state. "A man secretly funded by the Castillo cartel. My direct rivals. David offered to sell Maya's location to the Castillos in exchange for $10 million to cover his embezzled corporate funds. He was going to let my pregnant wife be kidnapped, tortured, and used as a bargaining chip to destroy my syndicate." The room spun. Maya gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning ash-gray. The nausea hit her like a physical blow. The safety she thought she had bought with her dignity at these horrible family dinners had been an illusion. She hadn't been in a fortress. She had been in a holding cell waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. "You bastard," Maya whispered, her voice shaking with raw, unadulterated hatred as she stared at David. "You were going to sell my baby." "I was desperate," David screamed, struggling against Adrian's grip. "They were going to take the company, Maya. They were going to take everything." "They still are," Gabriel said coldly. Gabriel looked at Richard Cho. "By 8 a.m. tomorrow, the Securities and Exchange Commission will receive a highly detailed anonymous package detailing 54 shell companies your son used to defraud investors, funneling money through Kensington Bank. By noon, Cho Logistics stock will plummet to pennies. By Friday, you will both be indicted for corporate fraud and racketeering because, as majority shareholders, you signed off on his ledgers." Richard clutched his chest, his face turning an alarming shade of grey. "No. No, we knew nothing of this Costa. You can't do this. We have generations of legacy. We have lawyers." "Your lawyers work for me," Gabriel stated simply, delivering the final, crushing blow with the casual indifference of a man swiping a fly off his coat. "I bought the debt on Cho Logistics 3 days ago through Harrison and Caldwell Holdings. I own this house, Richard. I own the chairs you are sitting on. I own the dirt beneath your azalea bushes. You are bankrupt. You are nothing." Gabriel turned his back on the ruined family. He didn't care about their tears, their legacy, or their money. They were insects who had dared to touch his son. He walked back to Maya. The coldness in his eyes melted the second he looked at her. He reached out, offering her his hand. It was a massive hand, calloused from violence, bearing a heavy gold signet ring. But it was completely steady. "The cage is broken, Maya," Gabriel said softly. "It's time to come home." Maya looked at his hand. Her mind was a chaotic storm of fear, betrayal, and a deep, undeniable longing. She looked at the Cho's broken weeping exposed as the treacherous cowards they truly were. David had tried to sell her to a cartel. Gabriel, the monster she had fled, had burned down the world to find her and dismantled a billionaire empire in 5 minutes just to ensure no one could ever threaten her again. "If I take your hand," Maya said, her voice trembling, but her gaze fierce, locking onto his. "If I walk out that door with you, there are terms, Gabriel. I will not raise my son in a house where men come to bleed on the carpets. I will not look over my shoulder for the rest of my life." Gabriel's eyes softened, a rare, breathtaking sight that only she had ever been permitted to witness. He stepped closer, cupping her face with both hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears on her dark cheeks. "I have already begun restructuring the syndicate." Gabriel confessed, his forehead resting gently against hers. "The port's the clean logistics. I am moving us into the light, Maya. It takes time to wash the blood off an empire. But I swear to you, on my life, our child will never know the shadows I was raised in. You have my word. And a Costa never breaks his vow. Maya took a shaky breath. She felt the baby move again, a solid, reassuring pressure. She slowly reached out, sliding her hand into Gabriel's. His fingers instantly closed around hers, engulfing her hand in a warm, unbreakable grip. "Okay," she whispered. Gabriel's eyes flared with absolute triumph. He didn't hesitate. He pulled off his heavy charcoal suit jacket and gently draped it over Maya's shoulders, shielding her from the chill of the shattered room. He carefully helped her up from the velvet chair, his arm wrapping solidly around her waist, keeping her close to his side. "Adrian," Gabriel called out without looking back. "Yes, boss." "Break his hands," Gabriel ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. "Both of them, so he can never sign another contract again." As David's terrified screaming echoed through the mansion, Gabriel guided Maya toward the double doors. He didn't rush. He walked, with the slow, deliberate stride of a king escorting his queen out of a conquered territory. They stepped over the unconscious bodies of the Cho security team on the front lawn, the cool night air of Long Island washing over them. A fleet of armored black SUVs idled in the circular driveway, surrounded by 24 heavily armed men who instantly stood at attention the moment Gabriel appeared. Gabriel opened the door to the lead vehicle himself, helping Maya into the plush leather interior, before sliding in beside her. He pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face in her hair, inhaling her scent as if he had been suffocating for 6 months, and finally found oxygen. "Drive," Gabriel commanded the chauffeur. As the convoy of black SUVs pulled away from the King's Point estate, leaving the ruins of the Cho dynasty, in their wake, Maya rested her head against Gabriel's racing heart. The storm wasn't over. The life of a mafia boss's wife would never be simple. But as his hand rested protectively over their unborn child, Maya knew one thing for certain: she would never have to hide again. The convoy of armored SUVs tore through the night, leaving the suffocating world of the King's Point elite far behind. Inside the lead vehicle, the atmosphere was a thick, intoxicating mixture of adrenaline and profound relief. Maya sat pressed against Gabriel's side, his heavy suit jacket swallowing her trembling frame. His arm was a steel band around her shoulders, holding her so fiercely it was as if he feared she might evaporate into the New York mist. For an hour, neither of them spoke. Words felt inadequate against the sheer magnitude of what had just transpired. Maya simply listened to the steady, powerful rhythm of Gabriel's heart beneath his crisp dress shirt. It was a sound she had spent 6 agonizing months trying to forget, and now it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Finally, the convoy slowed, turning off a secluded, unmarked private road in the Hudson Valley. Massive wrought-iron gates, flanked by heavily armed men in tactical gear, swung open instantly. As the SUV climbed the winding driveway, Maya looked out the tinted window and gasped. This was not the cold, cavernous Chicago penthouse where Gabriel used to conduct his ruthless operations. This was a sprawling, breathtaking estate built seamlessly into the rocky cliffs overlooking the Hudson River. Constructed of warm mahogany natural stone and walls of bulletproof glass, it looked less like a mobster's fortress and more like a billionaire's secluded sanctuary. "Where are we?" Maya whispered, her voice raspy from crying earlier. "Home," Gabriel said simply, kissing the top of her head. "I bought the Valerius estate 4 months ago. I knew you hated the city. I knew you wanted trees, air, and quiet for the baby. I've been having it retrofitted ever since. The perimeter is secured by a private military contracting firm, Aegis Defense Solutions. It is impenetrable." The SUV came to a smooth halt beneath a grand portico. Gabriel didn't wait for the driver. He opened the door himself and helped Maya step out into the crisp, pine-scented air. Waiting for them on the sweeping stone steps was a small, highly specialized team. Maya recognized Adrian, who had ridden in the vehicle behind them, but the others were new faces. Gabriel guided her forward, his hand resting securely on the small of her back. "Maya, this is Dr. Evelyn Reed," Gabriel said, gesturing to a kind-faced, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s wearing a tailored beige blazer. She was the former chief of obstetrics at Mount Sinai. I tripled her salary to be on staff here full-time. She has overseen the installation of a state-of-the-art medical and neonatal wing on the ground floor. Maya stared at Gabriel, overwhelmed. "You built a hospital inside your house." "I built an empire, Maya," Gabriel corrected softly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Building a sanctuary to ensure my family's survival is the easiest thing I have ever done." Dr. Reed stepped forward, offering a warm, thoroughly professional smile. "It is wonderful to finally meet you, Ms. Jenkins. Mr. Costa has been quite anxious about your well-term care. Given the stress of tonight's events, I would like to run a full panel of vitals on you and the baby as soon as you're settled." "Thank you, Doctor." Maya said, her shoulders finally dropping an inch. For the first time in 6 months, she felt a genuine, unadulterated sense of safety. Gabriel led her inside. The interior of the estate was stunning, vaulted ceilings, roaring fireplaces, and warm, golden lighting. It was completely devoid of the sharp, cold edges of Gabriel's former life. He guided her to the master suite, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the moonlit river. Once the heavy oak doors clicked shut, isolating them from the rest of the world, Gabriel finally let his guard down. The ruthless, untouchable boss of the Costa Syndicate vanished. He dropped his shoulder holster onto a velvet armchair, the heavy Glock thudding softly against the fabric. He turned to Maya, his eyes entirely stripped of their lethal armor, revealing the exhausted, desperate man beneath. He fell to his knees in front of her. Maya gasped, instinctively reaching down to grip his broad shoulders. "Gabriel." Gabriel wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing his face against her swollen belly. His massive shoulders shook with a silent, agonizing tremor. The man who had just dismantled a billion-dollar logistics dynasty without blinking was now holding on to her like a drowning man clinging to a raft. "I thought you were dead." Gabriel choked out his voice, a fractured, raw whisper. "When I came back to Chicago and found the apartment empty, when my men couldn't find a trace of you, I tore my own soul apart, Maya. I burned down half the city. I would have burned down the world if I thought it would light your way back to me." Tears streamed down Maya's face. She ran her fingers through his dark, thick hair, feeling the heavy burden of the pain she had caused him. "I was so scared, Gabriel. You were at war with the Castillos. There were car bombs, hitmen. I woke up every night terrified that the next phone call would be someone telling me you were gone, or worse, that they were coming for me. I couldn't let my child be born into a war zone." Gabriel slowly lifted his head, his dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears and absolute devotion. He reached up, placing his large hands over hers on her stomach. "The war is over. Maya loose." Gabriel swore, his voice resonating with an unbreakable vow. "I meant what I said at the shows. I am liquidating the blood money. I've partnered with Harrison Whitmore at Whitmore and Hughes to legitimize the ports. The gambling rings, the underground trades, I've sold them off to the highest bidders in the European factions. We are stepping into the light." Maya searched his eyes desperately, wanting to believe him. "And the Castillo's David said he called Senator Montgomery. Montgomery works for Diego Castillo. If they know about me..." Gabriel's jaw hardened, a flash of the predator returning. "Montgomery is a dead man walking Maya. He took Castillo's money, yes. But I took Montgomery's secrets. I have the offshore accounts, the blackmail tapes, the wire transfers. By tomorrow morning, the FBI will be raiding the senator's offices based on an anonymous tip my lawyers provided. The Castillos are losing their political shield. They are bleeding. Before Maya could reply, a sharp, heavy knock rapped against the bedroom door. Gabriel was on his feet in a microsecond, the vulnerability vanishing replaced instantly by lethal, calculated focus. He scooped his Glock off the chair in a single fluid motion. "Yes," Gabriel barked. The door opened just a crack, revealing Adrian's tense face. "Boss, you need to come to the tactical room. Now, it's Aegis Command. We have a massive problem." Gabriel's eyes darkened. He looked at Maya, his expression turning to stone. "Lock the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone but Dr. Reed or myself." Maya nodded, her heart kicking into her throat as Gabriel slipped out into the hallway. In the subterranean tactical center of the Valerius estate, banks of monitors illuminated the dark room with a cool blue glow. Jackson Pierce, the heavily scarred former Navy SEAL who ran Gabriel's security, was leaning over a digital map of the Hudson Valley. "Talk to me, Pierce," Gabriel demanded, striding into the room. "Senator Montgomery didn't just panic, Mr. Costa," Pierce said grimly, pointing to a flashing red cluster on the satellite feed, located about 5 miles down the private access road. "Before we leaked his files to the FBI, he tipped off Diego Castillo about the Long Island raid. Castillo knows you found the girl, and he knows this estate is your primary fallback. Castillo doesn't have the manpower to breach this compound," Gabriel said coldly. "The perimeter walls are reinforced steel." "He's not using his own men, sir," Adrian interjected, his British accent tight with tension. "Castillo hired Vanguard Solutions. They're a rogue paramilitary outfit out of South America. Black Ops dropouts, and they aren't driving up to the front gate." Pierce tapped the keyboard, switching the thermal imaging to the airspace above the Hudson River. 3 large, unmarked heat signatures were flying low, skimming just above the water level, completely evading standard FAA radar. "Helicopters," Pierce said. 3 stealth-modified Blackhawks. They're carrying breaching charges, heavy artillery, and roughly 40 heavily armed mercenaries. They will be over our airspace in exactly 12 minutes. Gabriel stared at the monitors. The Castillos were desperate. They knew that if Gabriel legitimized his empire, he would become untouchable, completely insulated by corporate law and legitimate billions. This was their final suicidal play to cut off the head of the snake by attacking the only vulnerability Gabriel Costa had ever shown Maya. "They want a war," Gabriel whispered, a terrifying absolute calm settling over his features. "Fine. But they do not get to wage it on my lawn." Gabriel turned to Pierce. "Activate the Chimera protocol. Shut down the estate's power grid, engage the titanium window shutters, and move Maya into the subterranean medical bunker immediately." "And you, boss?" Adrian asked, racking the slide of his customized assault rifle. Gabriel checked the magazine of his sidearm. "I am going to the roof. We are going to shoot those helicopters out of the sky before they can even drop a rope." The Valerius estate plunged into absolute darkness, save for the eerie crimson glow of the emergency tactical lights. Thick blast-proof titanium shutters slid down over the massive windows, with a heavy industrial grinding sound, sealing the mansion into a fortress of steel and stone. Maya was rushed down a private elevator by Dr. Reed and 2 heavily armed Aegis guards. Her breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. The sudden surge of adrenaline combined with the sheer terror of the impending attack sent a vicious, sharp cramp tearing through her lower abdomen. She doubled over in the elevator, crying out. Dr. Reed immediately caught her professional demeanor, switching into high gear. "Ms. Jenkins, look at me. Breathe. It's a Braxton Hicks contraction. From the stress." "No," Maya gasped, gripping her stomach, as another wave of agonizing pain ripped through her much stronger than the last. "No, it's not. My water just broke." Dr. Reed looked down at the pool of clear fluid on the floor of the elevator. Her eyes widened. "You're at 7 months. We need to get you into the surgical suite immediately." Up on the sweeping flat roof of the estate, the icy Hudson wind whipped at Gabriel's clothes. He stood beside an anti-aircraft missile battery, that had been illegally imported from a fractured Eastern European state, flanked by Adrian and 6 of Aegis's best operators. In the distance, the rhythmic, heavy thumping of helicopter rotors began to echo off the canyon walls of the river. "Visual contact," Pierce's voice crackled over Gabriel's earpiece. "3 bogies, distance 2 miles, closing fast." Gabriel didn't blink. He stared down the scopes of the dark sky. This was the remnants of his old life, clawing desperately to drag him back into the mud. Diego Castillo thought he could use brute force to break the Costa Syndicate. He was about to learn why Gabriel was the apex predator of the underworld. "Target lock acquired on the lead bird," an Aegis operator shouted over the wind. "Fire," Gabriel commanded, his voice devoid of mercy. A blinding streak of fire erupted from the roof of the estate. The missile tore through the night sky, illuminating the clouds before slamming directly into the lead Vanguard helicopter. The explosion was magnificent and terrifying, a massive fireball blooming in the darkness, scattering flaming debris into the freezing waters of the Hudson River below. The 2 remaining helicopters immediately broke formation, banking hard to evade. "Boss," Adrian yelled over the roar of the explosion. "Earpiece Dr. Reed is trying to reach you." Gabriel tapped his comms, his heart suddenly stopping in his chest. "Reed, status." "Mr. Costa." Dr. Reed's voice was frantic over the secure channel. "It's Maya. The stress has induced placental abruption. She's in active labor. At 29 weeks, the baby is in distress. I have to perform an emergency cesarean right now, or we are going to lose them both." The world around Gabriel vanished. The roar of the helicopters, the gunfire erupting from the Aegis snipers, the flames reflecting off the river, it all faded into absolute nothingness. Adrian Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a deadly hollow octave. "You have command of the roof. Do not let a single mercenary step foot on my property. Kill them all." "Consider them ghosts, boss," Adrian replied, stepping up to the heavy machine gun mount. Gabriel turned and sprinted for the roof access door, taking the stairs 3 at a time, descending deep into the bowels of the estate. The sounds of heavy artillery thudded from above, shaking dust from the ceiling, but Gabriel didn't care if the house burned to the ground around him. Nothing mattered but the bunker. He burst through the reinforced steel doors of the medical wing. The space was blindingly white, completely insulated from the war raging 100 feet above. Maya lay on a state-of-the-art surgical table, pale and sweating, gripping the metal rails with white knuckles. Gabriel practically tore his tactical vest off, throwing his weapons to the floor as a nurse hastily shoved a sterile blue gown and mask into his hands. He scrubbed his hands in the sink, his chest heaving, before rushing to Maya's side. He gripped her hand, pressing it to his lips. "I'm here, Maya. I'm right here." Maya looked up at him, her eyes wide with terror and pain. "Gabriel, the baby. It's too early. He's too small." "He is a Costa," Gabriel said fiercely, brushing the damp hair from her forehead, completely ignoring the sterile field. "He is forged from you and me. He is a fighter, and so are you. Let Dr. Reed do her job. I am not letting you go." Dr. Reed worked with miraculous speed and precision. The surgical bay was a flurry of organized chaos. Above them, the muffled heavy thud of a second helicopter crashing shook the foundation, but inside the room, the only sound that mattered was the erratic beeping of the fetal heart monitor. "Almost there, Maya," Dr. Reed said, her brow slick with sweat. "Pressure now." Gabriel held Maya's face, forcing her to look only at him. He poured every ounce of his soul, his strength, and his love into his gaze, anchoring her to the world. "I love you," he whispered fiercely. "I have loved you since the night you walked into my life, and I will love you until the day I die. Bring our son into the world, Maya. Bring him home." Maya let out a ragged, agonizing cry, squeezing Gabriel's hand so hard she nearly broke his fingers. And then, silence. For 3 terrifying seconds, the room was completely still. Gabriel stopped breathing. Then a tiny, furious, raspy cry pierced the air. Dr. Reed exhaled a massive sigh of relief, holding up a tiny, fragile, perfectly formed baby boy. He was small, barely 3 pounds, but his lungs were fighting his little fists clenched tight. "He's beautiful." Dr. Reed smiled quickly, handing the infant to the neonatal team, who rushed him to the specialized, pre-warmed incubator against the wall. "He's small, but his vitals are incredibly strong for 29 weeks. He's going to be just fine, Mr. Costa." Gabriel collapsed back against the wall, a breathless, broken laugh escaping his lips. He looked down at Maya, whose eyes were filled with exhausted, euphoric tears. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips entirely overwhelmed by a love so profound it completely eclipsed the violent empire he had built. "We have a son," Gabriel whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. "Dominic." "Dominic," Maya smiled weakly, her eyelids heavy with the painkillers Dr. Reed was administering. "Does he have your scowl?" "He has your strength," Gabriel corrected softly. His earpiece clicked. It was Pierce. "Boss, the sky is clear. Vanguard forces are neutralized. Castillo just watched his entire mercenary fleet burn on a live feed. The war is over." Gabriel reached up and slowly, deliberately pulled the earpiece out of his ear and dropped it onto the sterile floor. He crushed it beneath the heel of his boot. He didn't need the updates anymore. The Costa Syndicate, as the world knew it, died on the roof tonight. The man who walked over to the incubator to look at his tiny fighting son was not a mob boss. He was a father. A husband. Gabriel reached his massive calloused finger through the porthole of the incubator. Tiny Dominic, blindly rooting around, managed to wrap his impossibly small fingers around his father's knuckle. The grip was shockingly strong. Gabriel looked back at Maya, who was watching them with a sleepy, beautiful smile. The porcelain cage was shattered. The cartel was dust. The blood money was gone. Here in the impenetrable fortress overlooking the Hudson, Gabriel Costa had finally found the one thing his billions could never buy: peace. And as he watched his son breathe, he knew that anyone who ever tried to threaten this family again wouldn't face a mobster. They would face a god. If this story had your heart racing, and you love a fiercely protective, absolutely ruthless mafia boss who will burn down the entire world for the woman he loves, smash that like button right now. What was your favorite moment when Gabriel crashed the suffocating family dinner, or when he completely dismantled the billionaire's empire in under 5 minutes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another intense, dramatic story of love, betrayal, and absolute power.